Hello and welcome everyone to hopefully the first of a lot of following up tutorials. In today's video we start out with our whole setup that we need for what's coming up. In this series we're gonna build a Foundry system, a core system with a lot of features. I have a lot of ideas in mind what we can do together and build it step by step up, hopefully giving you an idea of how to do certain stuff with Foundry, with your own custom system, and how to do a little bit of development. First of all, the basics. We will start out today creating a base project where we then can work in and create what we're gonna need or want to do. How I'm gonna do in this series is basically I'm gonna work along and show you each step, go through the code, explain everything we do, and follow the basic standards that we should always follow, right around every corner. So, for that, we start now with creating our folder structure and creating our first few files. This will be the first step. Also, quick side note, everything I will do, I will upload to GitHub. So there will be the main repository for the system in case we reaching the point that I'm actually hooking that up to Foundry to let everyone play with it. But also there will be a second GitHub repository where we have every step. So after every video, I will upload as a separate branch how it's looking on my side, that you can always go up there, take a look, and copy it over if necessary. And with that, let's take a look of how the folder structure is supposed to look like. Here we have it. That's basically our whole structure. Let's get over it a little bit. So we start out that we are in the base path. So Foundry is when you're installing it locally, already creating this folder. Then you have the data folder where all the data for Foundry running is in. Then the systems folder, and then there will be the new folder. That folder should be exactly the same name as your system ID will be. We define the system ID down in the main system.json file. But as I said, it is important that the folder is exactly named the same, because otherwise we will run into some problems later down the line. Underneath, we have a few folders. We have the asset folder, which will be organized however you see fit. For me, it will be an image folder, a fonts folder, maybe a folder for graphics when I'm actually having vector graphics that are not images, but something like that. So that's a plain asset folder that I need for everything that's playing inside Foundry that is not made out of code-based structures. Then we have a language folder. Inside that we will have different language files because we are working with language files in order to have it support multiple languages and not have any kind of strings inside the code directly. I don't want that to be because I am someone who makes regularly a lot of errors when it comes to spelling. And if you imagine you need to go through your code to fix one of those spellings, that is a headache. Also, maybe some of you know, most likely not, because it's one of the first videos on this channel. I'm not a native English speaker. I'm coming from Germany, and German is my first language. It's my mother tongue. And therefore, I want to have this system in both languages. Most likely we will work on the English part together here, but there will be a German version as well. Then there's the folder for less. So for those of you who don't know less, to be honest, for me, I had the first contact when I created my first system for Foundry, and I saw how other people are using it, and it's actually a pretty awesome thing to do, to organize your CSS files and to have them automatically put into the main CSS file that Foundry is using. We will set that up in a moment, but we need a folder for that. Then we have a modules folder. It's the biggest folder with all your JavaScript files, with everything you're doing. Inside there is already a few predefined folders and then a few predefined files that we will create today, but with actually no content as for now. They are just placeholders, so you know where they are when we later jump in other videos into these files, where they are located. Hopefully you can then jump back to this video to see where they actually are. We will see. So there's the apps folder, which is basically all applications of Foundry. In Foundry, applications is everything you see on the screen. Everything is an application. Your character sheet, application. Item sheet, application. Something on the bottom of the screen, application. We will create multiples of those, and all of those will have their separate files, and they are all in the apps folder. Maybe, if necessary, if we have multiple files for the same application, we will create then a subfolder for that specific application, but that's not clear yet. Then there is the combat folder. Combat in Foundry is a pretty important part. I mean, it's a VTT. You want to have ability to do something for combat. And for that, you most likely want to create JSON files in regard of that combat. We will come to that part in a different video, but therefore is the folder already there. Then objects. Basically, yes, you have applications, but underneath you sometimes have an object. So I said already, character sheet is an application, but you maybe want to redefine what a standard actor object would look like and the standard functions. Therefore, we have the objects folder. And then the last part is the sheet, which is actually on top of the object character, you have a sheet. It's really more of the front end side of everything. So you can imagine that as objects are the template of an application, then the application itself is everything running in the background, and the sheet is then that running in the foreground. There are variations of it. It's very boiled down, but for now we can work with this assumption just for understanding. You will see later down the line. In different videos, of course, because we are only here for the basics. Then we have a config file. Generally, we will create it that we have config as one of the flying big objects, which is available everywhere, and we store everything that we might need on the way. So that will be defined there. Then we have a dialog JSON file. That's basically every small window that's popping up that maybe wants you to confirm that you want to take a certain role, that wants to confirm that you are doing something, that is just popping up for you to put in a node that is then saved behind the character but not shown every time. Those are dialogues, and all the functions for dialogues are in there. Same goes then for the dice JSON file. It's exactly the same as in terms of name is saying what's inside. Every function that is related to a dice roll is inside that. Then we have listener functions. That's a little bit, I don't think it's difficult after thinking of what I'm saying. It would be way better if I have a script for that. We will see if I ever write a script. Most likely not, but we will figure it out together. So in the listener file functions JSON file, I have basically every function that is triggered when you click something. So how it is, you have your character sheet, which is a static HTML, or in our case, it's not HTML, but handlebar files, but you have a static thing, and there you have buttons. Normally buttons would trigger just forms, thanks, brain, self-needed word later down the line. You would have a form that is then triggered and then something is happening. That would be the normal behavior. But what we are doing there is we having out the call with that button, and that is triggering then a function. That function is running asynchronously, and all those functions, everything that is triggered by a click from the user is in listener functions. And then I have something that I have in almost all my projects is a simple utilities.json file. The reason for that is I always find points where I have this one little function that is just doing something that I need on every different point of the project, so it makes no sense to have it in one file that I'm never gonna reference for anything else. There's the utilities, it will be used in most of the applications and everywhere around, and it's just basic functions that I use all over again. Going back to the main folder, we then have the packs folder. Packs are basically a way to serve items or actors or just any template that you want to have rolled out with your system that is not in code, is in a pack, and there are the packs stored. So that's the reason we need to deliver that on the system side. And then the last folder, which is templates. Again, we have here some subfolders, and templates, as I said, is just the definition of the HTML side. So every handlebar files that we are going to generate will be inside the templates folder, sorted by, is it an application? It's in apps. If it's a chat message and I want to define something for the chat, it's there. If it's a partial, it's in the partials folder. And if it's a sheet, so character sheet, item sheet, what you ever think of that will be in there. Now, I just jump over the partials thing because what are partials, you may ask, and you will find out later. Partials are basically part of another handlebar, so another HTML file. It's a way to put your one big HTML into different parts. And those are partials, and because it's easier for me to have them all in one folder, that's the folder there. And also because we need to load in the partials at system start, so it's just easier to have them in one path and not change around the path too much. Then back in the main folder, we have 5 files left, which are pretty easy. nether.js CSS is the standard CSS file, which is, as I said, the main CSS. There's only one CSS file where everything is in that we define in the less files. Then there's the nether.js, which is the main JavaScript file for the system. It's the one that's running in the beginning, where we define everything from the start and where everything is triggered. Also, we have there then the event system. We can then hook on stuff. All of that is handled there and is branching out in all the other files that we are gonna create. Then the README, it's basically just a GitHub README file for showing when someone looks at your code in GitHub or looks at your repository with an explanation what we are actually doing. We will set that up, most likely not in a video, but I will just do it and have it there already when I put it in the repository. Then there's the one mandatory file for making it a system. It's the system.json. We will set that file up in today's video, and in that system.json file we define everything that Foundry itself needs to know about the system. Who created the system? What is the version of the system? Where can I find that system? All of that is put in system.json, and we will go over everything that you need to put in there when we come to that later in this video. Last part is the template.json. There we define what is an actor, what is an item, what should have this data objects in at the start, what are the default values, what needs to be present for the system to work. Everything needs to be defined in the template.json. Of course, you could in runtime blow up your whole object for your actor, but it is set, it is more or less a best practice, I would say, to have it in the template.json defined and not add too much fields random in runtime and have spread out everything in different directions. So just template.json, and then we could put in there also all the comments on the different fields if we need to document that for ourselves. And that's everything that we need as a basic structure. So now what we will do, and what we're gonna do now is jump in the Visual Code. Visual Code will be the one EDI I will use for this project, what we will see in every video, and that's basically it. Most likely this will be blurred. There are a few things I'm working on, but we're gonna start out completely fresh. So today we open a folder, and in that we just jump into C, into Foundry, and then data folder, systems, new folder, nether, again, your system ID, you will define it later, open folder, yes, I'm trusting this outer because it's me, and now we have here the folder and can start create the different things that we need. I will do that real quick, and then we jump right back when I'm done. And we are right back. As you can see, I created now the full folder structure that we talked about with all those empty files. As you can see, it's all empty. What we do now is actually start setting up less, and then we start with the real Foundry file. So for setting up less, there are two things that we need. First, we need, well, some kind of plugin for VS Code to do all the stuff that we want from less. And then we need to set up the first less files that everything is running and that I can quickly show you how it works. So for that, we need here extensions. As you can see, I have already a few extensions, and all of them are pretty much have nothing to do with what we are speaking right now. The only important part is EasyLess. I use EasyLess as auto-compiling less to CSS on save. So that means every time I'm saving a less file, I'm recompiling my CSS file and having everything in there. So we quickly jump into here. We see that's more or less explaining how it's set up. We will do that in a moment together. And then we can just click here on install. I mean, I already installed it. So we click, you click install, then you have it set up, and that's everything you need. For me, that's already the case. So let's begin setting up the less in here. For that, we need to create a file in the less folder. We give it the same name as our system and as our main.js file. So we call that nether, but now it's a less file. So nether less. And now what we put in there is actually pretty easy. I will quickly copy something and put it in here and explain it. So that's basically all we need in here. This is pretty easy. Hopefully I do not forget to zoom in on that part, but I will remember in the editing. If not, tell me in the comments that I'm doing things wrong or what you wish for me to do a little bit better. So, explanation of those lines. The first line is basically giving some basic informations to our less module, what it needs to do. So first we're saying relative URLs, so relative definitions are active, so relative true. And the second thing that the less module wants to know, or the most important thing, is actually where do I want to have that CSS file in the end. So we say out, and as I said, we are relative from here. So we want to go one folder up and say nether CSS. So the file we have here, we want to have as our output. And then the second thing is we list all the files in the following lines that are actually included into that bundle. And for that, we just start with one less file, and we want to create one less file for the character sheet. So we're saying here character sheet.less, and since that is not existing yet, let's create that file together. So again, in the less folder, we create a new file, which is character.less. And now I'm just putting in here some basic, simple CSS code that we can use for showing. So that's all we need in here. Let's make it a little bit more beautiful. I'm kind of suckers for sometimes putting in spaces and having it look more beautiful to my eye. I know it's not completely the standard, but you will learn I'm basically doing that all the time. So what we have here is a simple CSS class where we say, okay, everything that has the class sheet needs to have the width 500 and the height 500. Pretty easy, should be nothing new. And we define here nether sheet, character sheet as the class path. Should be nothing new if you know a little bit of CSS. So we first save this file, so we have it here. And you already saw down here, real quick, popping up that the less file was compiled. That was a little bit faster than expected, but what we are doing here is also save this file. And again, we see it's compiled. So, and now if we go into this one, we see our whole class is created here. Now we have here the full path of what we are actually want to have in here, and we're only changing stuff here. So if we now, we are again back in the character sheet less file, say 580, and save that, automatically, if I'm saving completely. So, backtracking a moment, because there's actually one thing that we forgot, or I say we, I mean I forgot. So, quick point from the side here. Now we have here that there's a one file or one line missing, exactly the same as we had in the other file. Less needs to know, or the module needs to know what to do. So we have here the simple definition. Okay, look, little less file, the main file where we have the definition of what needs to be imported and also what needs where it needs to be outputted is here in the nether.js file. Because thinking it from an execution path, we are saving that one. If we are saving this file, then it knows, there's a main file. Let's take a look in the main file. Okay, we need to import every other less file as well and then dump it all together in one file. Otherwise, it's not directly knowing where to go. We could also call this mainless or something different, but as a kind of reminder of putting it together, if it has the name of the system or the system ID name, then it is the main file or the most important file. So that's the reason I called it nether.js and not main.js. Simple as that. And if we now have it saved, as I shown, we have here exactly the same. But if we are now going here and changing it to 580, because we decided we want to have that bigger, it's saved again. And in our CSS file, we have now 580. And again, we could just copy this one, call it sheet 2, and say, okay, my sheet 2 only needs to be 480, save it again, and again, we have now created sheet 2. And that's doing all the stuff of having it more searchable and more approachable, because in here it's for me easier to find my stuff. Also, I can do simple stuff as that's not what I want. It's basically saying, okay, put a comment here. So this is the class for the main sheet. This is the class for the second sheet. Saving it here again. We see no comments in this CSS file. This CSS file is as small as possible, just running for the system. But here I can drop everything that we might want to need without then having 4,000 CSS classes in here and scrolling to line 10,000 whatsoever. To give a little bit of an insight, in my other system that I developed over the past 3 years, we have over 20,000 lines of CSS. Finding that in one CSS file is no good way to look for anything. But having it split up in multiple less files make it searchable and way more approachable than anything else. Trust me on this. And with that, we have now everything set up that we need for our basic setup. So we can now move forward, actually doing the first really important file, which is the system.json. And now let's jump right into our system.json. I copied in here what we are basically will use and put into this file. Let's quickly go over all those parts. So the first thing, and what I mentioned already multiple times, is the system ID, which is nether in our case. Then the title is a little bit of a longer title. NetherGuard core system, because it's NetherGuard. It's the rule set for the NetherGuard roleplay system. It is a system because it's a system. And core because maybe we want to have additional systems, and because it's the core of the whole system without extensions, without anything. So in the longer descriptions, saying again, the core system for NetherGuard, created by me, Goody. So for version, we're starting out with the lowest version. I could go with 000, but let's say we start with 001. As soon as we have a running system, we have the 010, and as soon as we really have a working thing, we will go into 100. But for now, let's do that. Then author, this is actually an array, so if you have multiple authors for the system, you can put them here. For me, it's basically putting in my name and my Discord handle. You could also put in here your email address or your website, whatever you want to link on it. Then for compatibility, we are basically saying here, okay, look, that's for which Foundry version you're using. We can give a minimum, since we are developing that in the newest Foundry version, which is version 13. We say minimum 13. And we say also maximum 13 because there's nothing newer. What we could do, to be honest, is also saying 12, because there are not that many changes on what we are doing right now. But for full compatibility, we're saying minimum of 13. We say it's verified for 13.342. This is basically the Foundry version that I have installed on my machine that we will use while we develop, and where we test everything. So we are basically saying this is the one version that I as a developer used, so it should run always with this version. And we will keep that up to date whenever we update our Foundry version. Then ES modules, we are basically saying here, that's nether.js, our main JS file that we are referencing. For styles, we have our main CSS file that we are referencing. Then we're saying, okay, languages, we have the German language and we have the English language with the path to the language files. For socket, we start out with false. We will later in the series establish socket connections, work with sockets to sending data back and forth, but for now we don't need that. Then for the grid, we say standard distance is 1, standard units is meter. This can be changed for every scene, but here that's the default value for the system. And then there are 3 things that we are pre-populating here, but those will also be set later in our GitHub workflow. So we will set that up way later when we have something that we actually want to share with people. Right now we don't need that, but in general the URL is the URL to our GitHub repository. Then the manifest is where actually the system.json can be found on the release side, and for download where the system.zip is lying. So basically all our system in one zip file. Those are the 3 last points. And with that, we have our system.json. Now we save it, and now this part is done. The next thing now will be to jump in our main JS file. This one. It's empty yet, so let me grab the basic template, let's go over it. And after pasting it in, we are jumping right into it. So this is the main JS file that is carrying our whole system, and I already copied a little bit in it. But don't worry, it's nothing to fear. We are going quickly over it. So first of all, I'm importing here the config file that we set. Yes, it's empty at the moment, but it's fine. We will set something up there in a moment. Not really working functions, but at least that this is working. Then first thing is that we have an initialization phase of Foundry itself, and we are hooking into this phase to execute everything that we need to execute in starting up in Foundry. So the first thing is we tell in the log that we are here and we are starting our initialization. That's mostly what's happening here because the system is not really there yet. But we already set some stuff up. So the first thing is we have here a global config element, and we are adding into the nether our configs here. So that's basically passing it through that in the initialization phase, we are already setting that. Then we have here config.init. That's something that I found out over the last project or the last system I created. Sometimes it's helpful to indicate that some processes should not be running unless the initialization is complete and the system is running. So what I'm doing here is saying, okay, we are here still initializing, so we are initializing true, and then later down here we set that to false. So basically I can test if that is the case, then we are doing certain stuff or we're not doing certain stuff. Then the next part would come here is the registry for custom sheets and unregistering the standard sheets. But since we don't have a sheet yet, we will create that in the next episode. We have only here commented out how it would look like. Then we have two functions that we are calling here. First, preload handlebar templates, and then register handlebar helpers. We can quickly jump to preload handlebar templates. It's right here. We are going here over all the template paths for the partials to load them in, and that's basically it. Here we have already commented out a path that, or our path that we always need to repeat. So it's in systems, it's in the nether system, it's in templates, it's in partials, and then the template name itself. Since we don't have one yet, we commented that out, but it's then later easier for us to just use that, change the name and copy it over again to not always type out a full path. Then, as I said, the next thing is register handlebar helpers. Normally, you would start out with no helpers, but there are some helpers that I personally created and want as well in every project. So it's basically here down the ones that I thought will be maybe helpful. Maybe we are not even using them, but I like to have them already. So the first one is a simple equals helper. So we put in two values, compare them, and give back the answer. Then a check if something contains an element. So we have an element where something is in, we have a search, and we run includes and give back whatever comes out of this function. Next thing, concate. It's basically the option to concatenate different strings. Because we cannot do that in handlebar itself, we are using a function to do it basically here. Then is greater, is equal or greater are just two tests to say, to compare two values that we are sending in. If or is actually the same, we have two conditionals that we want an or in, so we can use this as well. So you maybe know handlebars has built in and if else, but we maybe want to work with more conditionals than just simple if. Then we have a do log, so whatever comes in here will be logged to the console. It's sometimes helpful to debug directly in handlebars what we get in and basically work with that. And to boolean is a simple test. Sometimes booleans get imported or get used into handlebars as strings, so I only want to check or to translate them to a boolean. Here I get a string in. If the string is true, then because that's a condition, we get back true. If that's not the case, then we get back false and can work with those two Boolean values. Then we have for. It's more or less the same as times, just a little bit different. So times will simply run n times. So we are checking here, have a for loop, and we are going here as n as how much we want to loop, and simply giving the content an n and loop over it. Here it's the same, but with a full for loop where we can input from which value we want to start, to which value we want to do, how much do we want to increase, and what content we want to loop over. So those are both doing more or less the same, but sometimes we need to configure them a little bit more. And the last thing is a simple check if something is not empty. What I'm checking here for as well, if it's a 0 or if the 0 is in a string, it's still not empty, so it's true. If it's null or an empty string, it's false. And either way, if there anything else than null or an empty string, we basically end up with true. The reason I'm needing the first line here is that for some reason null can sometimes be interpreted as 0 as well. And to catching that issue beforehand, we have basically this test. So those are the handlebar helpers that we have for now. General use case or general usable, not depending on anything system specific. And then we have a second general hook that is basically the same as the other hook here. So whenever the system is ready, so when Foundry is ready, it gets an event that says, okay, I'm ready, and then this hook will be played. What we are saying here, the initialization phase is finished, so we can set this value to false. And sometimes we have different stuff that we only want to execute whenever a GM is present, or that is a GM account that is running that invocation. We can then put in here the functions that only the GM should trigger. But that's as well only template. So overall, in this file is not very much in it as of yet, but we set it up as a template already to work with it later down the line. So I would say we can save that one. As I said, here we have this config file. We quickly set up the config file, so there's something called nether that we can import, more or less. And that will be then it. So let's quickly jump over. Okay, now as you can see, we basically put in here a simple test for the configuration. The only thing we are having in here is saying export. We want to export the constant nether, which is here defined first, of course, as an empty object. And then we define what is in this object. So we have, for example, attributes, and in attributes we define test as test. That's basically it. So we can save that one. And with that, we should be now able to open Foundry. So let's open Foundry together. And now there's actually one file missing that we also need to create and fill with a little bit of data. Nothing to be scared of. All will be good. All will be fine. So what is missing? Actually, the template.json. It's in the main folder right down here. So what is the template.json? The template.json, as I explained in the beginning of the video, is actually holding all the data in regards of our different data objects. So actors and items. And we define here what types we have, how should those types look, what fields we have in, what is their default value, all that important stuff. Also as well to know, this is basically what will be saved for each actor. Everything that we do on runtime that has not a field will be not saved, at least in general. So what we have here is basically actor and items, and we define we want to have a player character and we want to have an item. Let's make that capitalized, even though it looks a little bit strange. But on actors we say, okay, we have a player character as a type, and this player character is the type defined by its race, its gender, its age, its height, and its weight. So, and we set here default values, which is an elven male, well, maybe for an elf even a little bit too young, and too, weight should be fine for an elf, but still, that would be the first default value set. And then we have here items. For items we say we want to have at least an item, and here we are doing one option that is also possible, to have certain values in a template. So we say we create a template for general items. General items is every item that is really an item and not something for the character itself. And those items have always a weight, and they have always a value and a short description. So this is general items. So in the item itself, so the type item here, we say, okay, from templates, use general items. As you can see, it's an array. So if we define multiple templates here, we could reference multiple templates in the type itself. And then we say, okay, an item has also a type, which is item, and a quantity, which is 1. And with that, we can save templates and jump right into Foundry to take the first look at our system. And as you can see here under Game Systems, we already have our nether system in the first version. So this is looking good. The next part would be now to generate a test world. So we say create world, test world on nether. And the next thing is data path we don't need to define. We need to say nether core system. Everything else is optional. You know that from Foundry already. And we say create world. We now have a test world. We now can jump right into it, have the Game Master account, join. And you can see it's a working Foundry system. We have a little bit of text here. We can unparse and have our normal Foundry. With that, open up this here a little bit. All the looks changed a little bit. So we have actors, and we can now say, for example, here, we want to create an actor. And as you can see, we have now here player character as the one type that we can create, and say test create actor, and you can see it just has a name. The reason it just has a name and also the type here is not defined is, first, we need to define the language, so the translation for that. And also, we don't have a sheet yet. That's the standard Foundry sheet, and this sheet more or less does not hold any information or show us any information that is in. You can see all of that is empty because we need to define actually an actor sheet, and that is what comes up next. Also to show here on items, it's actually the same. We have an item that we could create, but we will come to that in the next episode. For now, thank you very much for watching. I hope it is helpful for you and you want to watch more of me and more of this tutorial series. If yes, please take a look down in the comment section below. I will always take a look there. If there's something not clear, I will try to help you via the comments. Also, you can find in the description of the video the link to the GitHub where everything that we created up to this point will be linked, as well as the official GitHub for this system if you want to look at it, how it is right now. So since this video is now only created, there will be only for this video, but it will grow step by step. So, thanks again. I hope to see you all soon. Bye.